Hi, I'm Jen Ferrara, and this is STORYCRAFT, Stories in Motion. It's a conversation about the art, work, and practice of telling stories. Tonight we're talking with Lida Winfield, and this event is hosted by RETN and the Flynn Center for the Performing Arts. Hi, Lida.
Hi, nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. Lida Winfield is an accomplished dancer, choreographer, and spoken word artist, creating original solo and duet group work, merging storytelling, dance, and visual art. Lida's traveled nationally and internationally as a performer and educator. In 2000, she earned a Master's of Fine Arts in Interdisciplinary Arts from Goddard College. Lida, it's really great to have you here.
Yeah, nice to be here, thank you.
Yeah. So I really want to hear about how you got interested in movement as a way of telling stories. How did this start for you?
Yeah, so I think really my allegiance is as a dancer. That's really like where my heart is, and have always danced since I was a really little kid. And so I identify as being a storyteller, but I don't identify as being a writer or of a traditional storyteller. So the movement part actually came first, and then putting text with movement came later.
Yeah, so I think about the way I did dance as a kid was very much like you take a class, you're told what to do, and you perform, and it's great. It's a great experience, but the idea of actually taking that movement and making it my own is something that really didn't occur to me. How did you start putting stuff together in a way that told a story?
Yeah, well, so took traditional dance classes as a kid, and so for those of you who have ever taken traditional dance classes, right, you face a mirror and the teacher teaches you a set phrase and then everyone copies that phrase, and it's a really particular type of skill and is actually really quite challenging. People liken it to learning a language, that it's really, it's that complicated and it's that sophisticated for your brain and that good for your brain. And anyway, so I was in classes like that, and oftentimes the way that it works is that then you learn the phrase and then you go in small groups across the floor once you've learned it. And so when that would happen, it would be in the small groups, and I would be going, and sort of halfway through I wouldn't remember what the phrase was anymore, and so I would make it up the rest of the way across the floor. And you could imagine, depending on who the teacher was, they either really loved that or really didn't. And so I felt like, and then as a 14-year-old, I joined a multi-generational dance theater company called Working Ground, that was, or Cradle to Grave Arts, and Hannah Dennison ran it, and I was 14 at the time, and the oldest woman in the company was 80. Wow. And so it meant that this huge world opened up to me of what dance was. And we made these extremely weird improvisational performances where we talked and we danced in abandoned buildings and we wore really strange outfits, and sometimes we danced from sun up to sun down in fields, and sort of, it was like this huge opening of what was possible artistically. And even though they weren't really stories per se, there was images and through lines that I felt really curious about, and so that, I think, just opened the door of thinking much bigger about what is a story and what is dance.
Yeah, that seems like it would just totally break open the box from the classroom environment.
Yep.
And to do that at 14 years old,
yeah,
that's awesome.
It was unbelievable. And part of what was so unbelievable then was to be allies and friends with women in their 60s and their 70s, and it was such a game changer for me as a 14-year-old, right, as you can well imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So now, storytelling.
Yes.
With movement and words. I've seen you perform, and you're doing both sometimes, right?
Yep.
And how are you making decisions about what you share verbally and what you're sharing physically? Is that something that you're making like a conscious choice about as you're developing a piece?
So I have multiple pieces that have text and movement together, and so depending on the piece, I've developed them a little bit differently, but typically the way that it works is that the text So again, I don't think of myself as a writer, so I actually create all of the text in my head.
Oh, that's
I don't
awesome.
do it with
Yeah.
paper at all. So I write the stories in my head and I edit them in my head and I write them in my head and I edit them in my head because they feel alive to me. They feel emotional. They feel physical, even though it's just the words at that point. And so I memorize them that way until I like them, craft them that way. And then the movement, and usually they become set eventually. So the text is set stories. And then the movement is improvised with really tight structure, like a lot of rules about what the movement looks like. And the movement I think of as a way to abstract and kind of complement the story. So I'm not personally artistically interested in pantomime or in kind of having the movement tell the story. I'm interested in this like kind of parallel process happening at the same time. For some reason that just feels really rich to me and really interesting. So the movement feels like, I don't know how to almost describe it. It almost feels like it's, so if here's the story and then here's the movement and they're both like there inside of me.
Oh, that sounds really cool. Hey, so, you know, I kind of just want to see your performance now.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, I feel like we're talking about this and it's really exciting.
Yes.
And I'm seeing this idea of this words and movement together. And I think it'd be really cool.
Okay. Great.
Can we do that?
Yeah, so let's do like a little context here. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do you want to talk about both
well,
now?
Why don't we talk, so your first piece is going to be In Search of Air?
Yeah, so I have a solo show that's entitled In Search of Air, Growing Up Dyslexic. So part of what I think is also interesting about me is that I'm an incredibly learning disabled person. So I didn't learn to read until I was in my early 20s. So created this story that tells my true story of learning to read that I tour all around the country, and primarily who's been interested in me has been educators and at schools and conferences, less kind of in the traditional sort of theater or dance world. So this is like a 10-minute excerpt that I'll do for you from that show at the very beginning, and then I'm going to do something else too, but we'll talk about that one later.
Yeah.
Okay, go now?
Yeah. Are we ready? Yeah, we're ready.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
I will get out of the way.
Let me start out by explaining that I come from an educated family, a family of scientists, teachers, administrators, world travelers, and book writers. As children, my sister and I played in the woods, ate limited amounts of sugar, went to bed early, only watched television programs on public access with the exception of The Cosby Show. Stories were read to us at night under blankets that were thick and warm. We were loved and cared for. Our thoughts were appreciated. Our feelings were valued. Band-aids were placed on our knees with kisses. Dinners were eaten at a round table, discussing our day. We were taught about the wide open world and communities that existed beyond our own. Kindness and polite behavior was a must. As very young children, my sister and I were enrolled in creative movement classes. And later in elementary school, I took weekly dance and theater classes. Opportunity was at our fingertips. Love was in our arms. First grade. I am not reading as well as the other children in my class. One would hypothetically think then that I would be given extra time to practice. Instead, I am punished to a stool that faces the window so that at recess time I can watch my friends play, and on occasion I wear a dunce hat. Surprising, but true. I am not that old. This was not that long ago. In small, tiny, cramped rooms, their technique for teaching children who were behind was to have us read any given paragraph repeatedly until we could do so without problem or hesitation. I was not alone in this tiny, cramped room. Eric Walcott, who later became my boyfriend in the 8th grade, and Rebecca Stone, who owned the largest collection of pound puppies in our elementary school, and I sat on one side of the table and our teacher sat on the other. She seemed so big, taking up half the room and table. I don't actually think she was a large woman. She told us to start from the top, and we had to read our way down until we came to a word we had a hard time with. She told us what that word was, and we had to start over from the top. This technique did not aid us in learning to read. We were learning to memorize. In 2nd grade, Sally Gray came to our school, and she wore a gray suit outfit with gray big glasses and gray curly hair. And she explained not only to my family, but also to my teachers that I was not dumb. I happened to be dyslexic. In middle school, there was more of us. A lot more of us. Every child with a social, physical, emotional, behavioral, or learning disability was tucked in the same classroom. In truth, we were angry children, and there was enough of us that we were a very powerful force. The difference between me and the majority of other kids in this classroom is that I have a family that loves me and advocated for me and fought for me and told me that I'm smart and special and worth fighting for. I can think of very few other kids in this classroom that was true for. Our anger took on the form of cigarette smoking, table turning, chair tossing, and a general disrespect to authorities and adults. Samuel Yarsanzo was my boyfriend in the 7th grade. He was one of the angrier children in this, and so I loved him, especially for that. He could not only steal cars, but he could take them completely apart if he so chose, or if he chose not to. One afternoon, I am standing at the top of the hall. All other students and teachers are tucked behind closed classroom doors except for Samuel and this teacher, this woman who told us almost daily that we were nothing. That we were never going to be anything. That we might as well stop coming to school then at the age of 12. And I watched this private conversation between just her and just him as she explained to him yet again how much of a loser she thought he was when something shifted and Samuel grew up tall out of his gut, swung his arm back and slammed it into her. And he stood tall with a look of satisfaction, and I imagine that he thought, who's on top now? As she, I knew what he had done was wrong. I knew that he should not hit her. You should not hit people. I also knew that he was about to be suspended, if not expelled, and remember that I loved him, so his presence would be greatly missed by me. However, my primary emotion was jealousy. I imagined that it felt so good in his body to fight back. Thank you.
I love that piece.
Thank you.
I love it. I love every time I see it. I feel so lucky to have seen it more than once.
Thank you.
Thank you. In this time, I was really struck by how you had these really symbolic movements. This one, the da da da, and this,
Yeah.
which to me means, in some ways, it's if it was like this, it would be like a hug. But when it's like this, it's more like a segment, and a little bit like it's on display, and such a subtle little difference.
Yep.
How do you find those choices? How do you make those choices physically? Do you work with a mirror when you're?
No, I work with what is the feeling, and I actually think that if you kind of just open that door, then it just comes out, right? Like what is trying to memorize something? What is repeating, trying to find a word, feeling like, oh, here we go to the top again. And what is it to be both kind of like protected and nurtured, and separate and isolated, and kind of like
patronized a little bit?
Yeah, like, oh, you can go here. Yeah. So what is that? And then from there, the movements just come. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And then the other thing I was thinking about is that you talk about how you have this script.
Yeah.
You've got this like, and that's like, I would call it like the spine of your story. That's what stays there, and is the structure. But your voice can change with the words, and you have some beautiful ways that you pause, and you're loud, and then you're low, and how do you make those choices?
You know, it feels similar to me to choreography, right? Which is, I think my overarching goal is how do I craft an experience that is true and genuine to me, that also fully welcomes you. And my tools are my body and my voice and my pause and my pattern. And obviously then the words, right? How do I do that? And the goal is to be artistic and to welcome you. That's the goal.
That works.
Yeah. Good, I'm glad.
and you're also telling this like super personal story. This is kind of your origin story in a lot of ways. And you're telling it in public more than once. Many times.
Many times, yes.
How does that feel, and how has that changed for you over time of performing it?
Well, the show has actually changed a good amount. So I have this show, kind of up until recently, has been my primary bread and butter. So I do this. I average about a show a month all around the country. And in the very beginning, it was longer and more dancey. And I actually, in the very, very early stages, the first version of it, I had made this really bizarre underwater film that got projected onto layers and layers of fabric that I hung from the ceiling, which quickly got cut because it was like so cumbersome to have a projector and blah, blah, blah. So it's changed. And then I have a version that I do more in kind of educational settings, and then a version that I do in more of a traditional theater setting. And it feels still alive to me. So even though you're right, the spine, maybe that's a good imagery of it, is set. There's lots of choices for me inside of it, so it really still feels very alive. And the personal part, you know, I get nervous to do this show more than other work I have. Though I'm going to show you some new work, which actually makes me even more nervous. But I think in some ways it's also really freeing. It's really nice to be seen. It's really nice to be known. And so in that way, actually, that feels more valuable, or that the result on the other side of being known feels worth the like upset stomach beforehand.
That's great. Well, how do you feel about showing us some
New work?
new work?
Ah! Right, okay, so it's good. All right, so so here's the thing, you know, I guess let me just give a little more context to this. So, so much of the time when we work as artists, you don't actually know, I'll speak for myself. I actually often do not know what it is that I'm making in it. And I think there is a real desire to be able to say articulately and clearly, what are you doing? People all the time ask me, so what's your latest project? What are you working on? And it feels like a very hard question to me, because a lot of the times I don't know. But not knowing isn't passive, right? It's not like, oh, I'm just like sleeping and laying around eating potato chips. Like, not knowing is an active, I don't know what it's gonna be yet.
It actually seems like if you put words to it, it becomes more fixed.
Yes, and it has felt sort of terrifying to me. So
Yeah.
for a while now, I have been really interested. So my working title of this new piece is called Imaginary. And it is, I'm really interested in imaginary friends. They're so fascinating, imaginary friends. And particularly like very specific things about them. Like oftentimes they are site specific. Like they don't just go anywhere with people. They live a specific spot. Or I have interviewed many people that had mean imaginary friends. Like that is so interesting. Or imaginary animals, or you know, just weird, peculiar things. So anyway, so I've been interested in imaginary friends, and I also have felt very interested in wanting to make something much more abstract that isn't necessarily text heavy, or sort of a linear story in that way. And so I have been very stuck. I've really wanted to be making new work and felt very stuck. And part of what has helped is I've had a collaborator. I've been working with a videographer. Her name is Rebecca Wiseman. And we've been making these very bizarre installation films. They're very bizarre. But because we're playing with this idea of imaginary and kind of what is imaginary and what is real and what is in the light and what is in the dark, it's felt okay to have it be really bizarre. Anyway, so this excerpt, this is a long-winded set to tell you I don't know what I'm doing, right? So,
No, it's exciting. You're making it all the more exciting.
yeah, okay, great. Dramatic entrance. So this, I'm going to show you a few minutes from a longer solo. So it's an excerpt of a longer solo. It's very, very new work and has no speaking at all. So it's totally silent. Pretty weird.
Very exciting.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah? All right. Good
I'll
intro.
get out of my seat. Whoops,
Oh,
there's your mic.
okay. My mic, your mic. Okay. I've also never done this in this room, kind of a room.
Thank you.
Kind of weird.
Oh my gosh. So that was playful and cute and scary.
Yeah.
And creepy and exciting and like itchy all at once. I felt like itchy a little bit. So you said a little bit about what you were interested. How did you get started putting this piece together? Did we see more than one? Were we seeing particular imaginary friends, or was this the idea of imaginary friends?
It's not even that.
Or friends in general.
Yeah,
like
it's not even, right? I mean, I guess this is part of what's so interesting, right, is that everyone kind of wants to know, like, well, what is it? I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's this idea of kind of what is real and what is pretend. And my interest in imaginary friends was kind of how it started, and but this is not like, oh, I've interviewed people and now here are their imaginary friends, right? So it's not that linear in that way. It's,
but you've interviewed people that sort of...
Yeah, like very casually in people's kitchens, right? Not like with a microphone or anything. But yes, I've just been really thinking about imaginary friends and thinking about imagination in general, although that feels like too big, frankly. I'm interested in like what is real. You know, and feel like I had this interesting experience where I was at someone's house and there was a little girl that was telling me that there was a fairy in her pocket, and I don't know, maybe there was, and who cares if there wasn't? And I don't know, it just made me really, I just have been really curious and thinking about and our use of play and imagination and how valuable that is as a child and how much we're losing that for children. And then how, like, if I tell you there's a fairy in my pocket, you feel worried about my mental health. That's just interesting to me. All of those things just feel really fascinating to me about what is real. And we live in such a world that so much of the world actually, I think, isn't really real, but we believe that it's real. And how is that actually the same or different than having an imaginary friend? Like, is the government our imaginary friend? I don't know. You know, I could sort of like just keep going here. And
Facebook's a lot of
yeah, like all of that stuff. You know,
friends.
I don't know. So I've just been really curious about what's real. And so this, someone that I showed this solo to said to me that it was like, reminded them of flipping through a National Geographic. Like, you're just looking at all these different pages, or like sitting in a like New York City subway station, and you're just like seeing all these different people. Like this idea of just like that we can be. I am hundreds of people, actually. I don't know. I just am interested in all that stuff. You can see it's not really targeted, but
no, it's really cool. There was a moment where it almost looked like you were sipping tea.
yeah, have tea. Yeah,
and then, but then, like maybe you were eating a snake or
I don't know, something
went
really, bad. I don't know.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Well, and some of the images are very concrete, like the teacup is very concrete. Yeah. But then others of them, like I at one point imagine I'm the ocean, and I bet you don't look at me and know that I'm the ocean in that part. But that doesn't matter, you know. Doesn't matter. That's the like fun thing about dance, is that it can be anything, and what I think it is doesn't have to be what you think it is. That's sort of nice, even though lots of people don't like that. But
did you? Is this? I like it.
It's true though, right?
Yeah.
They don't like. They want to know what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of. I mean, we're talking about story as this sort of big theme, and for a lot of people, story is linear, is verbal, is very specific, and has one right answer. And it's very challenging to not have that be your structure.
Yeah, and I think it's very challenging. I think we don't. I think we've our world, this country is really built around that there's a right and a wrong, and it's better to be right, opposed to just that there's endless possibilities. And I think that's so much of the work that artists do, and so much of the work that dance really does, is that there's just endless exploration in there. And you're right that it's not a story in the sense of like this happened and then this happened and then that happened. It's more like a poem.
Well, it's gorgeous. It's really cool.
Thanks.
And so another thing about you is that you have a long list of things you do. You wear many hats.
Yes.
Choreographer, performer, dancer, spoken word artist, and also a teacher.
Yep.
And I was interested in that piece and how teaching and dancing and performing, how do these work together? Do they work together for you? Does one feed another? Do you have to compartmentalize?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it sort of depends on what the teaching is, right? So I do lots of different types of teaching, and so it was 8 years ago that I decided that I was going to stop doing side jobs and really see if I could make a living as an artist. I had worked as a baker and as a breakfast line cook primarily. And then, of course, like, you know, house cleaner, dog walker, like all of the other things that you do for income. So when I made that decision that I was going to step away from any of those side jobs and see if I could support myself with just my art, I also realized that I got to decide what counted as just my art, and that maybe someone else looking at me didn't think like, oh, well, I don't know if that's really your art. And in that context, teaching, all of the teaching that I do fit into that category. So all of my teaching feels like art. in artistic practice, but they have sort of like kind of different spokes of a wheel. And I think they feed into themselves, or it all feeds into itself as some of it is practical, so some of it is income, and that's important. And then but all of it is just rooted in creativity. I don't know if I'm actually answering your question.
It's okay. It's really interesting what you're saying. So
But
keep going.
Sometimes, depending on where I'm teaching, sometimes I might play with ideas for a performance in a workshop, right? Or I might use sort of like that opportunity as a way to develop ideas or kind of bounce things off of people. And other times it's like completely not related, and it's really maybe to serve that particular group or that particular idea or mission, depending on who's hired me. I'm interested in vulnerability and authenticness and truth-telling, and I think that happens in almost all of my work.
That's really nice. So I have a question that's sort of my favorite.
Oh, okay.
It's the question about what happens when things get hard.
Yeah.
When it doesn't work the way you want it to work.
Yes.
Or you're not motivated anymore.
Yes.
There's just the sticky spot.
Yes.
What do you do to move past that?
Sometimes just cry.
That's a good place to go.
Yeah, I have actually felt very stuck in the last couple of years. And it's kind of been my first big chunk of being stuck. I've been stuck in little ways before, but this has been like whoa, I don't know. And felt like, I'm not an artist, I'm not making, I'm not doing, like I'm betraying somehow. So what to do? So there was a lot of crying and a lot of praying. And one of the things that I think I have come to learn is, although I do a huge amount of solo performing, that I like to collaborate in some way with other people. So I will show up if I have a meeting with you, right? Like I'm gonna come there, even if it's like I'm gonna lay on the floor and be like, I don't know what I'm doing in my life, right? That there is something about showing up. Yeah. So being in partnership has really helped me in any way with a collaborator artistically, or even if it's like, will you come on Friday so I can show you this new thing that I'm making? So I'm accountable somehow beyond myself. Yeah. Or the best is like, I have a gig. Like I gotta make something for a gig.
You work well under pressure.
I don't necessarily like if it was like, next week, I wouldn't do that well. But if it was like, in a year from now you have a gig, I would work well. And I think, in knowing that you were going to ask me this question about being stuck, the primary thing that I think for me and that I witness with other artists is you have to have space. And we don't live in a world that values taking space. We really feel like unless it's generating income or it's prestigious or it's sort of like happening, then you better go. And I have really struggled with how to prioritize. No, I'm gonna go lay on the studio floor for 2 hours, even though I don't have a plan, I don't know what I'm gonna do. But you have to have that space. You cannot, I don't feel creative when I feel exhausted and stressed and overworked, period. So I think in trying to change the stuckness is actually about trying to make space and to recognize that space is valuable, which doesn't always come easily to me.
How have you made space?
It's a good question. I don't know if Mary Oliver actually said this, but someone told me that she said this. That she said that for many years she prioritized her creative time and being in nature, and she said no to tons of things that was going to cut into either of those things. I don't know if she actually said it, but it's okay, she did. But that has really stuck with me.
Yeah.
So I feel like walking in the woods counts towards making art. It counts. I feel happier and healthier, and that counts. And I'm a morning person. I like to get up early, so that means I'm gonna go to bed early, and that counts. That helps. That makes space. It makes me feel happier and healthier. And then I think it's a practice of saying no, which I think as artists actually feels very hard. I think we operate in a place of scarcity a lot of the time. We feel like there's not going to be another opportunity, so you better say yes to this one, especially if there's money connected to it. So picking, and then not feeling guilty if it doesn't actually lead to anything, because sometimes it doesn't. And like not, I feel like I spend a lot of time trying to justify, like, well, is it really okay to take the space now, or to do this, or to not do that, or I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of I feel like that's the 21st century conundrum of
Yes,
everybody.
of everybody.
You know?
Yes, right.
But there's a certain way that not a lot of people that sit around saying to you, "Have you made time for your art today?
Yes, no, nobody ever says that.
Have you put aside some time for creativity today?" Like,
That's right. No.
Not many people are saying that.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. Well, and it's not really at the core something we value in our culture. So So it feels like you're sort of like pushing against all of that to say, actually, no, sorry, I'm gonna make a little dance now that is about imaginary friends and has no text, and you won't know what's happening. And that, like to say that's valuable feels really hard. Though I really believe it is. I really believe it is.
Yeah.
But what am I going to do with that? I have no idea. I don't know what that's going to be.
I love that you shared that with us.
Yeah, it made me really nervous. Yeah. I was doing it in my sort of living room today.
Yeah. Well, so you're doing it in your living room, and now you're doing it here.
Yes.
And I've seen you perform in a school.
Yeah.
And I've seen you perform in performance like theater spaces.
Yep.
How does your work change depending on where you're performing? Does it change?
Yeah, it changes. Part of it is just practical, right? Like both of the little excerpts that I showed you would be significantly bigger and more dancey if we weren't on a rug and there wasn't a table and like that kind of stuff. Oh, so it's sort of just practical that way. But it also really changes based on kind of who's in the room and also how I feel. So sometimes I feel kind of more dancey or more free. And sometimes you're on, and sometimes it's just bad. It's like everything else in our lives. Like you just, yeah, happens.
Well, I don't know if we have any folks here who are interested in dance and performing. We may have some very accomplished dancers. I actually don't know who's in the room or who's watching this.
Yes.
But I think it'd be really great if you could share a little sort of gem of advice for people who want to get started with performing, with movement, I think it's even really just useful for people who are sort of like myself, this is my movement most days, right? But like how to get involved in doing some of the work that you're doing this in the medium of moving and performing. That's a long-winded way to say it, but
no, it's okay. Well, I think there's something so valuable about taking space, right? Of saying, I'm going to walk in the woods. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to make a drawing. I'm going to value that my creativity contributes to the essence of my life. Obviously have days where I do not prioritize that either, but feel really interested in doing that and work with a lot of people to try and encourage them to do that and do that in lots of different settings. But obviously there's tons of fabulous classes around here, and the Flynn Center does amazing dance and theater and music classes. And I also think there's just something so, again, about having an ally, right? Like, I'm going to show up, I'm going to show you something that has really helped me to be accountable to another person. And particularly in the early stages, that isn't going to shred you, right? Because we got to make bad stuff to make good stuff. That's just the way it goes. You got to make bad stuff. Not a big deal.
I like that. You got to make bad stuff to make good stuff.
You do. You just got to try. You got to try. And there's nothing lost in the trying, though sometimes can feel so vulnerable or ego-oriented. So I guess I think the trying, I think it's cultivating a culture, right? Like who are your allies, your friends that feel also interested in saying, well, what are you doing these days? Are you making something? And showing it to them, taking classes. And I think also just that we are more than one thing. I am more than my computer work. You're more than your computer work. And you're more than what your job is, and you're more than what it is, how you make an income. It's just so hard to remember that in the world that we live in. This is our world.
This is it. Moving forward.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. No, I think what you were saying about just our culture and how we don't really value this time and this space is really. So we should all just starting now, take some space, find some supporters, some people. Well, and I think so much of that is trust. Also, where you trust that I'm valuable, my life is valuable, my ideas, my creativity is valuable. So I'm gonna pick it sometimes. That's also valuable, opposed to just my career move, or my raise, or my driving my car, whatever. Those things are good too, but it's just not the whole. It's not the whole thing. Yeah. I'm really talking to myself. Yeah, it's good. Well, you're talking to me too. I'm hearing you. I'm I gotta make some space. Gotta say some no's. Gotta. Yeah, hard to do. Make some room. Yeah. 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 Lida, thank you so much. This was a really awesome conversation. Thank you for sharing your performance with us. It was really beautiful and inspiring. Thank you. It's great to have you here. Yeah, thank you. So this has been STORYCRAFT, Stories in Motion. And this was presented by RETN and the Flynn Center for the Performing Arts. And if you want to find out more about this show and our other shows, go to retn.org/storycraft. Thank you for watching.